the handwriting on the wall? That's a question that has been used many times, saying in a concept of you don't understand what's right in front of you. You can't see this, what's right in front of you, letting you know to avoid this circumstance or situation. But did you ever realize where that came from? I dare say many of you who are watching this have read that before. You know, he's talking about the book of Daniel and King Belshazzar when he saw the handwriting of the finger writing on the wall. And that's exactly where that comes from. And I want us to consider that by way of Monday meditation. So I hope you have your Bibles. You'll look at Daniel chapter 5 and let's answer the question, can we read the handwriting on the wall? Daniel chapter 5 verse 1 says, Belshazzar the king made a great feast to 1,000 of his lords and drank wine before the thousands. Reveling was going on, this party was going on, and that was a common thing in that day and age. And Belshazzar, of course, this is a time frame looking roughly around 539 BC. The book of Daniel is not laid out in chronological order. As a matter of fact, Daniel chapter 5 would be more fitting to come after 7 and 8 in this time frame of Belshazzar being king. Now we're going to see in verse 2 that he's referenced as Nebuchadnezzar's son. Belshazzar was Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. He and his father were co-reigning at this time. Belshazzar's father was the more historic king that you'll read about more so in the books, and some have discredited the book, but it seems to be more fitting that they were co-reign. There was a co-reign that was going on between Belshazzar and his father. And he would be the grandchild, of course, of Nebuchadnezzar. Belshazzar, whilst he tasted the wine, commanded to bring the gold and silver vessels which his father, or grandfather again, Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple which was in Jerusalem, that the king and his princes and his wives and his concubines might drink therein. So they're having this great feast. And again, I said it's not uncommon for them to have a lot of banquets and parties in that day and age. Matter of fact, archaeology has uncovered many banquet halls in that region, some being 400 feet long. And so they brought these gold vessels that were taken out of the temple. When Nebuchadnezzar besieged Jerusalem in Israel, he took the gold and the silver from the temple when he overthrew them completely, leveled the temple. He took the gold and the silver vessels that were used in worship to Jehovah God, and he put them in the storehouses in the places of temple worship for their gods, as being these pagan Chaldeans. And so they brought that gold, and they're using this for their partying. They drank wine, verse 4, and praised the gods of gold and of silver, brass, and of iron, of wood, and of stone. So it reminds me again of Romans chapter 1 and how Paul said that there are some people who don't want to hold God in their knowledge and don't like to retain that knowledge, and they worship and serve the creature rather than the creator. And that's what these people were doing. And so the same hour came forth fingers of a man's hand and wrote over against the candlestick upon the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the part of the hand that wrote, and the king's countenance was changed, and his thoughts troubled him, verse 6, so that the joints of his loins were loosed, and his knees smote one against the other. Literally, his knees are knocking. His face is changed from the jubilant, partying, reveling person to now he's somber and he's afraid, and his knees are shaking and knocking one against the other. The king cried aloud to bring in the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers, and the king said to the wise men of Babylon, whosoever shall read this writing and show me the interpretation thereof shall be clothed with scarlet, and have a chain of gold about his neck, and shall be the third ruler in the kingdom. And so he's offering this praise and adoration. He's offering this place of high esteem to anyone who can read what that finger wrote on the wall, the plaster of his palace, and tell him the interpretation thereof. So again, just like they're worshiping and praising the gods of gold and silver and brass and iron and wood, now he's looking to soothsayers and astrologers to try to explain to him what's going on. He didn't get the right area of praise and honor. Now he doesn't get the right area of understanding and knowledge. He's looking to man and the things of this world. All the king's wise men, they couldn't read it, of course, verse 8. They couldn't tell the interpretation thereof, because God is sending this message and is above them. Now the queen, she had some understanding about her. She remembered she remembered that there was a man named Daniel who King Nebuchadnezzar named Belteshazzar. He was able to interpret dreams. He had the spirit of the gods, as she would say it, in him. And this man stood out. Why don't you call him? Don't be afraid. Don't be troubled. He can do this for you. She understood. She got that. And so he calls for Daniel to come in. And what's interesting is he tells Daniel, he gives Daniel all this praise and accolades, as you see in verses 14 through 16. He's praised, I've heard about you. I hear you can do these great things. You can tell the interpretation. You do this, I'll clothe you in scarlet. I'll give you a gold chain about your neck. You'll be third ruler in the kingdom. Look at verse 17 then. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, let thy gifts be to thyself, and give thy rewards to another. Yet I will read the writing unto the king and make known to him the interpretation. I'll give you what this means. I'll tell you what this means. I'll explain it to you. But before Daniel does that, listen to what he said again. I don't need your stuff. I have a relationship with the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. I have a relationship with the true God of Israel, the true God of the world. I don't need your gold and give it to someone else. Matter of fact, what good's being third ruler in a kingdom going to be that's going to come to an end? And that's what he's going to tell him in the end. So he doesn't want those things. But not only that, he tells him, I'm going to give you the interpretation of what's written on the wall and explain this to you. But before Daniel does that, he gives him a little sermon. Let's go ahead and read verse 18. O thou king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar, thy father, again we know that to be grandfather, a kingdom and majesty and glory and honor. This kingdom didn't come to be because of the greatness of your grandfather Nebuchadnezzar or your greatness. It came about because of God. And for the majesty that he, that is God, gave him, Nebuchadnezzar, all people, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. That's your grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar. Whom he would slew, whom he would he slew, whom he would he kept alive, whom he would he set up, whom he would he pull down. Verse 20, but when his heart was lifted up and his mind hardened, note it, in pride. Yes, that's the problem that Belshazzar's having as well. He was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. And he was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointed over it whomsoever he will. God put your grandfather in his place, and now here you are. What have you done? Verse 23, or verse 22, and thou his son, his grandson, O Belshazzar, hast not humbled thine heart, listen to this, though thou knewest all this. Belshazzar, you didn't see the writing on the wall. And so God literally wrote on the wall. You didn't see and learn from the mistakes of your grandfather and how his pride overthrew him. And now God's written it with the finger on the wall for you to see. Verse 23, thou hast lifted up thyself against the Lord of heaven. And they have brought the vessels of his house before thee, and thou and thy lords and thy wives and thy concubines have drunk wine in them. And thou hast praised the gods of silver, of gold, of brass, of iron, of wood, of stone, which see not, in whose hand thy breath is, thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, the God in whose hand thy breath is, and whose are all thy ways, hast thou not glorified. You're praising these things, gold, silver, wood, stone. You're praising these things, and they have no life in them. But your very existence comes from God, and you ignore him, and you defame him. Verse 24, then was the part of the hand sent from him, and his writing was written. Again, Belshazzar, you didn't see the writing on the wall, so God literally wrote on the wall. And this is what he wrote. This is the writing that was written, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of that. Meaning, God hath numbered thy kingdom and finished it. God's numbered your days as king. He's numbered your kingdom itself. He's putting an end to it. This is going to be the end of your kingdom. Tekel, you're weighed in the balances and found wanting. Belshazzar, you didn't measure up. You're not measuring up to what you should be. God blessed you with this kingdom and you're abusing it. You're abusing it with pride. You don't measure up. It reminds me of Isaiah chapter 6 when Isaiah's in the throne room of God and he sees the glory of God and he says, I'm undone. I don't measure up. And this is what was said of Belshazzar. Then there's Perez. Thy kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then commanded Belshazzar, and they clothed Daniel with scarlet, put a chain of gold about his neck, and made a proclamation concerning him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. What good's that? Because in that night, verse 30, was Belshazzar, the king of the Chaldeans, slain. And Darius the Median took the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And so Darius the Median, the Medes and the Persians, the Medo-Persian Empire, you have Darius coming in again around 539 BC is this time frame. You know, in 537 there's something great's going to happen. Cyrus is going to be king and he's going to let the children of Israel go back to their homeland and rebuild the temple. And so looking at this again, though, I want to go back and deal with the question at hand. Do we see the handwriting on the wall? Belshazzar didn't see the handwriting on the wall. He was lifted up with pride and God literally wrote on the wall. What about you and me? Are we learning, as we meditate upon this, are we learning from the mistakes of the past that we shouldn't do those things in the future, that we should maybe learn what didn't work then and try to do what's right, or learn what did work then and try to follow in those footsteps, realizing that God rules in the kingdoms of men. He gives to whomsoever he will. When we look around to the world that we're living in today and we see there's some difficulties going on right now. The weather is kind of rough right now. The ice everywhere. People could be in danger. People are in the hospitals. People are sick. People are dying. The governments in this world, what are they doing? They're serving self in many cases. What are we going to do? See the handwriting on the wall. Remember that God rules in the kingdoms of men and God's coming back one day for his church. How will we measure up? When we're put on the scales of judgment, how will we measure up? It's appointed unto men once to die, and after this the judgment, Hebrews 9:27. And Paul told the Corinthian church that we're going to all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. And every one of us will receive the things done in our bodies according to that we have done, whether it be good or whether it be bad. How will we measure up in that day? It depends on whether or not we're willing to see the handwriting on the wall right now. One day it's going to be too late. But right now is our opportunity. I gain excitement from this text. I gain an understanding that I serve a God who knows everything and he can take care of me just like he took care of Daniel. You see, the dangerous thing is, and when we're reading a text such as this, is trying to relate so much to maybe Belshazzar, we forget that we need to be relating to Daniel, who, though he was in his 80s at this point, was still maintaining his faithfulness and his trust in Almighty God and still being protected by him. Yes, the Medes come in and overthrow Babylon, but Daniel is still taken care of. What will happen in our world? If we're faithful to God, we keep our trust in him, he's going to take care of us as well. That's something on which we can meditate this Monday and every day. May God bless us to see the handwriting on the wall.